This is Paul Schneiderman back on the 126th edition of the Sports Untold podcast, also on Radio Raven Radio. And I have a special guest today, Jeff Rasley. Jeff is an author, poet, traveler, retired Indianapolis attorney, philanthropist. Jeff's been involved in just about everything imaginable. Jeff, I'll get back to you in a minute or two. I last had Jeff on as a guest back in, I think it was November, October of 2018. So it's great to have you back a second time. And my show has been on a hiatus basically since last October. Won't get into everything that occurred, but happy to have it back up and happy to have Jeff on as the first guest of 2023. So we can call this a historical edition of the Sports Untold podcast. I want to introduce my new assistant and producer, Olivia Coyne. I go back to Livia and her family for many, many years, basically since I was in kindergarten. I've known her father, Ben. And I also know her uncle and her grandparents and her mom, Stephanie. And Olivia is a student at the University of Washington, and she's kindly agreed to help me with my podcast. We're hoping that Olivia can be a sidekick at times. So I want to introduce Olivia here. She's going to do a great job. And it's fun to work with an enthusiastic young person. My podcast is now on Spotify, YouTube, Amazon, Google, iTunes, Podbean. You can go to sportsuntoldpodcast.net. I'm working on getting the .com back up. There's a story on that too, but I won't focus on too much of that stuff today. I encourage my listeners to click the like button regarding my show, comment, and go to sportsuntoldpodcast.net. Check out my show, and some of the other editions are also on YouTube and some other outlets. Been very honored to have many wonderful guests, Jeff included. Jeff, I promised I would get back to you. As I mentioned, you're a retired attorney. You're an author of 14 books. You played football at the University of Chicago, president of the Besa Village Foundation, which funds culturally sensitive development. Jeff's been involved in various nonprofits. He's a father, husband, grandfather. As I mentioned, I first met Jeff back in 2018, and a lot has happened in the world since then, for sure. In my last interview with Jeff, it was then called Sports and Stuff, but it's Sports Untold number 34. We talked about a couple of Jeff's sports books, including Monsters of the Midway, 1969, Sex, Drugs, Rock and Roll, Vietnam, and Football. Jeff also wrote a really good 2016 book, Hero's Journey, John Ritter, the Chip Hilton of Goshen, Indiana memoir. So I've read 2 of Jeff's books. Haven't read them all, but I look forward to reading more of them. And Jeff, I appreciate you coming back on the 126th edition of the Sports Untold podcast, also on Radio Avenue Radio.
Thank you, Paul. At my age, I feel like a historical artifact. So since this is a historical event, I think I fit right in.
Well, I certainly don't want to put my my podcast as any kind of major historical artifact, but I appreciate that. It is really good to have you on and to have you back, as I'm trying to get this podcast renewed right now. Jeff, you've written 14 books, as I mentioned in the introduction, and I want you to share with us a little bit about your new one.
Well, thanks. The latest book is called 72 Wisdoms, and what I did with this book, which is really unlike any of the other books I've written, is I took 72 quotes, which each one of which I think contains a nugget of wisdom, and they're ordered to create a sort of journey through what I think are the greatest questions that every thinking, sensitive person should ask and try to answer in the course of life. So it has quotes, and then so I take each quote, do a little biographical research into who said it or wrote it, what was the context, and then what do I think this quote really means, and then research how it's been used by other people, and try to sort of riff on looking to find an even deeper meaning, if possible. And so it asks and tries to answer questions starting with, birth, what do you do when you have a child born, up through how do you face your own death and everything in between.
How did you find these 72, I guess, sections of wisdom? Were these ones that you created, or did you find them from other sources?
Yeah, there's actually three quotes from myself from books I've written, but other than that, they're all from other sources. And it was really interesting because the way this book developed was I noticed that I was just sort of randomly coming across little pearls of wisdom that I wanted to save and to try to hang on to and not just let, slip away. So I started keeping a list of quotes that I thought were kind of interesting. And then after I had, five or six of these, I wanted to look deeper into, what was the context of the quote. And then I just wanted to think more deeply about what what meaning I could extract beyond sort of the obvious or the conventional wisdom that was expressed. And after I had about, five, six, seven of these, I thought, well, I want to keep doing this. And I could turn this into a book, and I had no idea where it would end. So I just started taking the quotes that I have, researching, writing kind of an essay about each one. And then after that, I would just run into quotes that just seemed to be like, this should be the next one. And I did end up doing some reordering, but really not very much. It just seemed as if there was this sort of magic at work that every week I would find, a new one that I wanted to use, and so that's how it developed eventually into a book.
Or some of these quotes from famous people in history?
Yeah, I mean there are quotes from ancient Greek philosophers, uh, Lao Tzu. And then also from sort of pop culture figures, Muhammad Ali has one, Betty White has one, and so they really sort of span a spectrum of philosophical. There's a couple out of the Bible. And from the Bhagavad Gita. So there's, wisdom literature incorporated, but also is popular culture.
Why don't you share for the listeners how they can buy that book and maybe also purchase some of the other books? Did you have a website? Why don't you just go ahead, make this an infomercial for a minute. Okay.
Always happy to do that.
Sure.
And my publicist appreciates it. So I have a website. It's my full name, Jeffrey, Jeffrey, Rasley, Rasley.com. And I also have an author page on Amazon. So if you go to Amazon and just input my name, the author page will come up with all 14 books. And they're also on my website with a lot of other information about like the Bassa Village Foundation, the Scientech Foundation, which I'm also the president of, trekking in the Nepal Himalayas, etc.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, I was just thinking with high school and college graduations going on right now, your book on 72 themes of wisdom could be a very good book for a lot of young people right now. So I think you've given me a couple gift ideas right now. So
Well, I had kind of a fun experience on Sunday. Just 2 days ago, I attend a Quaker meeting here in Indianapolis, and the pastor had asked me if I would be the guest preacher last Sunday. And even though he was there, he'd been out of town most of the week at a retreat, and so he said he didn't have time to prepare a sermon. Would I do it for him? I said, sure, happy to do that. And as he introduced me, he said that he had my book, 72 Wisdoms, on the nightstand by his bed. And he had already been through it once, reading one chapter, one wisdom each day or night, and was now on his second read through. And that, well, Pastor Bob, I think I owe you a share of the royalties now.
love it. That's
so,
awesome.
so maybe you too, Paul.
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely, my pleasure. Well, Jeff, I'm going to put you on the spot. And I know when people get this question about their works, they don't always know how to answer it, but I'm still going to ask the question anyway. What is your favorite of the 14 books you've written?
Um, yeah, I've had that question asked, and I have a standard answer, which is it's always the last one.
Okay.
Um, I mean, each book I wrote it because I wanted to. I've never, I mean, actually, my first book, I was under a publication literary contract deadline, but I've never written a book because I needed the money or I felt obligated to write it. Every single one of them, I just felt inspired and, had an idea that I then got out my legal pad and started scribbling, and then eventually it turned into a book. So my last one is my current favorite.
Well, I think that's a good answer. I don't hear that when I hear about when you ask that type of question to various people involved in different things. So yeah, that's a good answer. Well, Jeff, we're going to hit all sorts of subjects today. You know, this is a sports theme show, but we hit on other stuff on Sports Untold. But so we're not just going to talk about sports the rest of this interview. But I do want to ask you about a couple of things about Indiana. And I subscribe this Discoverer blog. I recommend it. And it's a great travel tip blog. And there's things on like underrated cities to see or things to avoid in different countries. It's a wonderful blog. And I was just in
I
Philadelphia.
subscribe to it too,
Isn't
Paul.
it terrific? Yeah, isn't it
Yeah,
terrific? I was
it
just in
is.
Philadelphia and I got a lot of my itinerary from the Discover. But Discover recently picked Indianapolis as a very good, underrated, affordable city to see with 200 parks and museums and art shows. I want to ask you a little bit about if somebody has a day in Indianapolis, what do you recommend they see?
Contact me. But actually, I know a lot about the Indianapolis city parks because when I was in law school, I had a summer job between my second and third year as an intern in the mayor's office. And my job was to visit every single one of the almost 300 city parks and write up an evaluation of the potential tort liability that the city had. So I visited every single little corner park in the city, and Indianapolis really is great for city parks. We have um, either the first or second, depending on who you ask, biggest municipal park in the country called Eagle Creek. Central Park in New York City supposedly might be bigger, but it's a huge nature preserve, hiking trails, a lake, beach sailing, um, an ornithology exhibit, and it's a really fantastic park. But we have many others, and then of course in May, this is the month of the Indy 500, which I believe is still the largest sporting event in terms of a single day number of people that see it. We have up to 500,000 people that come, most of them squatting on the infield to watch cars go around an oval track. So, if you want to be around a lot of people, May is a great time to visit. But we also have a really beautiful downtown, which is centered around Monument Circle. And Indianapolis is big on war memorials. Then we have a mall just north of Monument Circle, and we have three cultural districts. I live right near one of the cultural districts, and we have a really well-developed um, bicycle hiking trails, paved trails throughout the city. So
I understand the Children's Museum is very nice, right?
it's usually rated as the best children's museum in the entire world. It's
Wow.
an amazing facility. It's huge. It's one of these museums. It's too big to see it all in one day.
Now back to the sports theme here. I understand the NCAA Hall of Fame is in Indianapolis, right?
It is, and it's right on this canal, which 20, 30 years ago was, I'm not going to call it a cesspool, but it was definitely not an attractive place to be. And in the last few decades, the canal front has turned into this beautiful walkable area. It has multiple museums along it. Um, the NCAA Hall of Fame is one. There's a big one called the Idle Jorg, which is a Western Native American sort of cowboy Indian, on politically correct terminology, museum. And then there's the Indiana State Museum, which is just all about Indiana history. But restaurants, bars, just a wonderful place to walk or bicycle.
I'll have to check out Indianapolis, Indiana one day, Jeff. The NCAA Hall of Fame, is that worth an hour or two? Tell us a little more about that.
Yeah, I would say I mean, if you're a sports fan, and especially a college sports fan, it's definitely worth at least a couple hours. So it, goes back in history. It I didn't really use it as a source for my Monsters of the Midway book, which has a lot of the history of college football in it. But like that book, it goes back and it has exhibits of the earliest days of college football and basketball and how the sport sort of developed and up through the current season.
Well, I'm kind of a museum nerd, Jeff. I generally like museums, so I think there's quite a few in Indianapolis. I just learned more talking to you, and I appreciate you expanding a little bit on the Discover blog that I read the other day, and I wanted to ask you more about it. But Indianapolis is picked as a very good, affordable city to visit. I appreciate that, Jeff. I've been following on Facebook now for about close to 5 years since I met you about 5 years ago, and you've been posting about traveling around some small towns in Indiana. And I like small towns too. Like I sometimes check out small towns in the Pacific Northwest, which I really enjoy. There's towns like Port Townsend, LaConner, Washington. I really enjoy hitting some of those towns at times. Why don't you tell us a little about what some of your favorite small towns are in the state of Indiana?
Uh, that's really hard because there's just um, lots and lots of really cool small towns around Indiana. And my wife and I decided, and this really sort of started during COVID, that instead of taking big trips and being on airplanes and all that stuff, we would do little driving trips, usually just, one day there and back, pick out one or two small towns that we thought would be interesting, spend time walking around the little towns, have lunch or dinner there, and sometimes do an overnight. But so we've been doing that now for off and on for a couple of years, and so I started probably started last summer, maybe, posting photographs and a little write-up of the towns that we've been visiting each week. So yeah, I appreciate that you've been following that, Paul. It's been a lot of fun to do, especially since I don't have a current writing project. But well, okay, I'm going to give props to start off with my own hometown, which is Goshen, Indiana, which is a very uh, furthest north central part of Indiana. It's 12 miles below the Michigan line. And the thing that my wife and I really enjoy about this sort of the classical county seat in Indiana is almost all of them have a courthouse square, and many of the courthouses are the most beautiful buildings in the town, which in case of Goshen, which is Elkhart County, it is. Um, and it has this really cool fountain on the lawn, which is Neptune's fountain. It's a statue of the Greek and Roman god Neptune, Poseidon, with his big pitchfork and dolphins and mermaids. And the other thing that's wonderful about many of these towns is they were very badly hurt when the crash of the auto industry and the steel industry. happened back in the 1980s, because in many of the towns in Indiana have small factories that were suppliers to either the steel or the auto industry. So, for example, my hometown, Goshen, had three what we called rubber factories, and they made the rubber parts that are used in cars. And back then, there was all sorts of little rubber parts that went into cars, and they were the sort of the staple of the economy of Elkhart County. And most of them either shut, and then there were a number of metal stamping plants too. And most of them either shut down or became basically a skeleton of what they were. But like the towns that really come back from that period successfully, Goshen had some visionary business leaders, and they brought the RV recreational vehicle industry into Elkhart County and have more than replaced the businesses that were lost in this steel and auto parts related industries. And that's really what we've observed, is that the towns that have managed to climb their way out of that really deep, uh, troubling recession that the Rust Belt area here in the Midwest experienced were towns that had visionary leaders and who worked very hard to bring new businesses into the town and recognize that the downtown uh, is something to be proud of and to draw visitors to come see it. So, you know, cute little restaurants on the courthouse square, a bar or two, live music, that kind of thing. And the other thing that's really fun is a lot of these towns, like Goshen, has a First Friday celebration. So the first Friday of every month, they sort of really put on a big show, live music, restaurants have specials and that kind of thing. They might have a classic car show, something like that, to bring people into the downtown and celebrate. So that's that we've visited so many towns, but the ones that are enjoyable all kind of fit that description.
What's Bourbon, Indiana like?
Bourbon, Indiana, that we haven't made bourbon yet, so we'll have to put that on our list. And I'm not sure if I've ever been there.
Okay, I just saw it before the show starts, ranked as like a small town Indiana to see. So that name
Really?
caught my attention.
Yeah,
Bourbon.
that's an attention-getting name.
Yeah, right, for sure, for sure. I do have going on a Kentucky bourbon tour on my bucket list at some point, but that would be. But Bourbon, Indiana, stuck out today. Well, great. Well, I love your analysis of a little bit about your state, and I think a lot of people forget in the American Midwest there are more waters and forests and stuff. I think people realize in a lot of Midwest states. So there's more. It's not as flat as I think it's perceived by some people. The American Midwest. So.
Yeah, and and you bring up a good point. One of the other elements that seems to determine whether a town has succeeded or not is because many of these are on rivers, and Indiana had a lot of the sort of tributaries of the Erie Canal system, and so there are canals, rivers, number of lakes, and the towns that have been smart about how to use their waterfront also, if you just let it, like the canal in downtown Indianapolis was a few decades ago, just an unused, because it was part of the Erie Canal system, and the the business that owned it actually went bankrupt, and eventually the Indianapolis Water Company bought it, and over time, has turned it into this beautiful, enjoyable, walkable area. And small towns have done that as well.
What a fascinating point. I have a first cousin. Muriel's an urban planning professor, University of California, San Diego. I'm going to ask Muriel about the effects that waters and rivers have on urban planning or city planning in general. You kind of brought something up that I may ask her about, but well, here's a little sports question for you. Indianapolis has a lot of sports going on: amateur, college, professional, minor league professional sports. And of the four major leagues, Indianapolis has the Pacers of the NBA and the Colts NFL. Jeff, do you see the potential of Major League Baseball or the NHL ever coming to Indianapolis?
Um, a number of years ago, in fact, it was back in the 80s, Indianapolis tried very hard to get an MLB, Major League Baseball team here, and it didn't work out. And there's a lot of people that actually don't want that because we have a AAA team, the Indianapolis Indians, that has a beautiful park field called Victory Field. And it's a state-of-the-art field. It was built, maybe 10, 12 years ago. Um, and the team is popular, and so there are some people that really would like to just keep it the way it is. As far as hockey goes, actually a good friend of mine is a 49% owner in the hockey team that we have, which I think is basically equivalent to the AAA. They're a Chicago Blackhawks feeder team. And one of the funny things he says is every time we get on a winning streak, the Blackhawks will grab our best players, and then we
Right.
go on a losing streak. And they're called the Indy Fuel. But yeah, I don't know. Indianapolis is a sports crazy town. And it used to sort of claim to be the amateur sports capital of the world because we would very often get the NCAA tournament here. If not the Final Four, we would often, well, every year we'll at least get regional games, first round games, and so forth. And we a couple different times we hosted the Pan Am games. In fact, we have Pan Am Plaza, which is a big outdoor skating area and kind of a urban park left over from the last time we hosted the Pan Am games. So yeah, I doubt that in the foreseeable future we'll get a hockey team, NHL or MLB. But we also have a soccer team called Indy 11 that's I think sort of again at the equivalent of the AAA level. And they've had a really good season. They were undefeated for about two-thirds of this season, and I know I think they may be in their tournament right now, and I've lost track of how they're doing. But the owner of that team is actually a friend of mine as well, and he really, really wants an MLS team. And he's got this huge plan to build a first class MLS level stadium. And I think he may do that. So I would predict if we're going to get another major professional sports team, it's going to be MLS.
MLS is very popular in Seattle too right now, very popular, as are the Kraken NHL team. But just talking more about the Indianapolis sports scene, Jeff, you don't have to have all the major teams and still have be a great sports city. That's part of what I'm kind of extrapolating from this conversation. So you still all right. So this is a two-part question. I want to know the first part A of this question is, who do you think is the most prominent sports figure to ever come from the state of Indiana? Here's a couple of names: Larry Bird, John Wooden, Oscar Robertson, Jeff Gordon. I want you to pick the Jeff Rasley take on who's the most prominent sports figure to come from your state. And my second question is, who do you think is the most prominent pro athlete to have played in Indiana? Or so the two-part question. For the second question, I'll give you a clue: Reggie Miller, Peyton Manning. But anyhow, the first question, let's start with the most prominent sports figure, in your opinion, have come from the state of Indiana.
Well, I think if we look at it historically, it has to be John Wooden. Um, if we think of it more in who sort of, if you took a survey now, who might it be? Um, I think it actually it would probably be Peyton Manning in terms of who's the most popular, well-known figure now in Indianapolis of our sports heroes. But John Wooden, I mean, he still has the record for the most NCAA championships. And he was, I think a three-time All-American. And back when he was playing at Purdue, the freshmen didn't get to play varsity. So he was a great athlete himself. But I think, just in terms of looking at his record, I think he should still be considered the greatest college coach of all time. Now, I know, a number of coaches have won more games career-wise, but nobody, comes close in terms of championships.
So you would pick Wooden over Larry Bird as most prominent sports figure to come out of the state of Indiana.
Yes.
Wow. Wow. Okay. And the most prominent pro athlete to play for an Indiana pro franchise, you would say is probably Peyton Manning.
Yeah, just and part of it is I would say popularity. I mean, Larry Bird is very popular here, and that he came back and became a coach for the Pacers and is a part owner and all that. Larry Bird is beloved here, so don't get me wrong. But in terms of basketball, we have so many great players. I mean, Oscar Robertson, I think, is a better basketball player than Larry Bird.
Wow.
I mean, the record for most triple doubles. I mean, to have the record of triple doubles that he has. I mean, Larry Bird is a great shooter, great passer, uh, not that great a rebounder, but still, undoubtedly a great player. But I think all around, plus the fact I got to have dinner with Oscar Robertson once, and I've never had dinner with Larry Bird.
Wow, that's what a fascinating guy to meet. And this is just so much fun because I'm getting a whole new perspective. I've never heard anyone make an argument that Oscar Robertson was a better player than Larry Bird. This is one thing about interviewing I enjoy so much is getting some different perspectives. Okay, well, fun. And Reggie Miller, you got to put up there as a prominent pro player from Indiana or played Indiana as well. Jeff,
Sure.
you played college football, University of Chicago. We talked about that more in Sports Untold 34, so I can encourage my listeners to listen to Jeff's first interview with me back in 2018. Do you have any general thoughts, Jeff, in the perspective as a retired attorney and former college athlete and all this debates about college pay and name, image, likeness? Just any general thoughts on those issues?
Yeah, I think college athletes, particularly at the Division I level, have been an exploited class of workers. Um, so I played Division III football and swimming, and was on the rugby club. And Division III, you're doing it for fun. Um, and you still spend a lot of time at it, or at least you should. I spent less time at it than I should have. Um, but at Division I, it's a job. I mean, if you look at the number of hours, and not just during the season, but year round, these athletes put in, and they're making money for the school, at least if you're playing basketball or football. Um, and to have you know, I mean, there were such crazy things historically for like Steve Alford, great IU basketball player, got suspended because he allowed his image to be used for a poster to raise money by a sorority for a
Remember
charity.
that?
I mean, this sort of thing was just crazy. When I was in high school, a high school player from Fort Wayne got suspended for a year because he accepted 6 golf balls in a golfing tournament during the summer. He was a basketball player, not even on the golf team. I mean, this is just ridiculous. It's the Same, the whole Olympic, the historical Olympic athletes who had to, meet this amateur status that Avery Brundage, um, who's one of my most despised figures in sports history, um, because of, just that we want these athletes to perform up to these standards of excellence, and they thrill us and we love them, and then we make them poverty cases. I mean, that historically, that's what we did, or we make them cheaters, which happens so often. Um, so I'm delighted that athletes now can make money. I do understand how it's skewing even more, perhaps, than it has in the past, recruiting, where one university will help and really work at helping its athletes make money through NILs and that sort of thing, whereas another university might be, sort of stick with more traditional standards of you're a scholar, a student first, and an athlete second, and that university may have much more trouble recruiting top-notch athletes. But those are choices the universities make. I think the best answer would be that every Division I athletic program could pay athletes a stipend and make it a living wage so that they could devote themselves to their sport and not worry about whether they have enough money to buy food or clothes or books for the next semester. And I think that's a decent return that schools get. And I'd allow Division II and Division III schools to do that as well if they wanted to. Um, but yeah, I think it's great that athletes, and I also think it's a really educational process for athletes to try to figure out, how do I make money this way? I mean, it's capitalism. It's using your capital, your talent, your image to learn how to start a business and make money. So hooray.
Jeff, one thing that's come up with a couple of guests on my show over the last several years um, is the idea of having workers' compensation laws protect athletes. Could you go along with that, making sure that injured athletes have some more protections?
Absolutely. Um, I mean, I think of a guy on my team. He was going to be probably our best lineman, first year student, first game of the season, kickoff, he blows his knee out. This is back before we had arthroscopic surgery. You blew your knee out, you were going to be limping the rest of your life, which he has. And he had to become a manager of the team because he couldn't play any longer. And what did he get for that? I think, the university took care of his medical care, but yeah, I mean, why shouldn't he have gotten workers' comp, something to compensate him for that injury that he suffered representing the school? And again, I think particularly Division I, I mean, Thatch, my old friend that happened to, he wasn't making any money for the school because it was Division III, but if he'd been a Division I player, that they're making money off them. So why shouldn't workers' comp cover?
A lot of equities there. Jeff, speaking of University of Chicago, I know at one time it had a major football program, and it's a very prominent school. I know people who've attended University of Chicago besides you. Can you see any taste in alumni circles there at the university to make it a big time sports program again? Could you see that happening in the future, University of Chicago? Chicago?
I don't see it ever becoming a Division I school again. I mean, the history, especially the history of University of Chicago football, is fascinating, which is why I wrote a book about it. But it was the dominant. It was the Alabama of early college football. You know, seven Big Ten titles, three national championships, couple undefeated seasons. Amos Alonzo Stagg, most winning college football coach until Bear Bryant, surpassed him. But in 1939, the school terminated varsity football. So we didn't even have a football team, let alone Division One, until it restarted in 1969. So, but when football first started, and I played in the mid 70s, so not long after it restarted, it was a real struggle. I mean, the university devoted very little money to the program. We, we rode on a bus once to an away game that had a hole in the floor, so we were all wheezing from carbon monoxide poisoning by the time we got to the game. Our practice uniforms had some of our game uniforms had not holes, but had been sewn up. My practice uniform jersey was 33, but my number was 82 because we didn't have a practice 82. So, you know, but it was a lot of fun. And the university over time has become very proud of it, the legacy that it's developed in Division III sports. That when I was on the team, we would have, maybe an entire roster of about 30, 35 players. And sometimes at practice, we didn't have 22 players that would turn out to have a full scrimmage. Now they'll have 105 players on the team. I've got to be honored as one of the members of the early teams when they had the 50th anniversary of 69 of football restarting, which was a very delightful experience. And I just this year was named to the Hall of Fame committee, so we choose the next round of University of Chicago athletes who will be honored by the Hall of Fame, which is really fun thing. Um, but it's become a very good Division III school. They've had multiple national championships in tennis, swimming, uh, not football yet. They've made it to the Final Four, Division III basketball, women's, and so it's a good Division III program, and I think that's what it should be because there's less than 5,000 college students. There's something like 15,000 graduate students, but only 5,000 college. So it's still a small liberal arts college, even though it has a great academic reputation.
And I like another thing to add to all the things you're involved with, Jeff. That you're on the Hall of Fame committee, University of Chicago, too. So another thing to add to your long resume of things that you're involved in. So, um, Jeff, this is Paul Schneiderman on the Sports Untold podcast with Jeff Rasley, having some fun. And you got about around 10, 15 more minutes or so. You got a little more time?
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Great. Jeff, here's our two questions I've asked about every guest, give or take, since about late 2019. And you mentioned that you did meet Oscar Robertson. The first question here is, who is a deceased sports figure in history you would have loved to have spent some time with, shadow with, interviewed, and who is a living sports figure you would enjoy spending some time with?
Well, probably my favorite athlete of all time was Muhammad Ali. And I when I was a little kid, I disliked him at first because he was sort of everything you weren't supposed to be, loudmouth, disobeying rules and all that one. And he was Cassius Clay. But over time, as I matured and watched his career and really, thought it was terrible when he missed, 3 years of the prime of his career boxing. Um, and I just think he just became this delightful personality. Um, and as he aged, and it was so sad to see what he went through. and because of so many blows he took to his head, probably. But he became this very loving kind of warm, almost a guru type uh, personality. He went from the baddest ass on the planet to that, and which is just such a wonderful journey. And I think as the older I've gotten, the more I appreciate someone who, as they age, they find ways to impart wisdom and love, and that's what he did. And he gave millions and millions of dollars away. When I researched him for the quote that I use in my 72 wisdom, he is estimated to have given over $50 million away, and
Wow.
far more than he made as a boxer. But so he's my favorite deceased sports hero. Um, as far as living, gosh,
It can be a manager, commissioner, broadcaster. It's a broad question. It's a sports figure. So
yeah. Okay, I'm really torn between Peyton Manning and Reggie Miller. Because I mean, they're Indianapolis, so loyalty to the hometown. Um, and both of them, to some extent, are on that track that I just described for Muhammad Ali. Reggie Miller, the mouth. I mean, he was, for being such a skinny guy, probably one of the worst trash talkers in the NBA. And was very good at it, getting into the head of his opponents. And has become a really good broadcaster. I mean, he's articulate, he's intelligent, he's got a sense of humor. But then Peyton, uh, he has done so much for this city. I mean, we have the Peyton Manning Children's Hospital.
oh,
He,
good.
he endowed a hospital. So he's a wonderful philanthropist. Plus, when he first came to Indy, and so he's going to save our franchise, because we stole the Baltimore Colts, and some of us are wondering whether it was worth it because they were losing every year. But it's okay. We got the number one draft choice. He's going to be great. His first season, I think they won one game, and then the next season they turned it around. It was almost like a perfect flip. But when Peyton, as a young guy doing commercials, he was so wooden. I mean, he was like a cardboard character. He was terrible. And now he's just blossomed into this funny, wonderful, on-air personality. And it's been a lot of fun just seeing his maturity and his growth, and his devotion to Indianapolis, which I think in a way didn't treat him as well as we should have by letting him go to Denver and got another Super Bowl for another city, darn it. Um, but yeah, so that it's just I like the development of both of those two guys, and they were great athletes. And Reggie didn't bring a title to Indy, but came the closest that we've had since the Pacers have been in the NBA.
I'll never forget Reggie Miller and Spike Lee getting into it when they're, during one of those New York, Indiana games that they were yelling at each other. But great names. And a lot of my guests have mentioned Muhammad Ali as a deceased sports figure they would have loved to spend time with. A couple of my guests, knew or spent time with Muhammad Ali, but his name has come up. No one had mentioned Reggie Miller or Peyton Manning yet for that second question. Another sports figure with Indiana roots that I would have loved to spend time with is John Wooden. So
Oh yeah.
you gotta that's I was just thinking of Wooden with that Indiana connection, but great answers to those questions. If you had to pick between Reggie Miller and Peyton, who would it be?
To have dinner with?
Yeah, if you had to pick one or the other.
Uh,
Put you on the spot, Jeff.
wow, that is such a tough one. Um, I would, okay, I'll go with Peyton because he won a championship for
Okay,
us.
okay, fair enough, fair enough, fair enough.
Reggie, you didn't quite make it for us.
Almost, yeah, fun,
Almost.
fun. Jeff, I recall you and I chatted off the air once or twice, and I believe that you know Mike Pence, the former vice president of the United States and former governor of Indiana, and you take this question to how you want to go here with Pence. I want to know this. Did it surprise you at all that Mike Pence refused to go along with Trump's demands that he not certify the 2020 election? Were you surprised at all that Pence stood up to Trump on that?
It's hard to remember, at the time, my reaction to it. In retrospect, no, I'm not. And the way I knew Mike Pence originally is I was a young associate in a law firm, fairly prominent firm here in Indy, and Mike was a summer intern for us. And we had, I think it was 6 interns that summer. And at the end of the summer, we made offers to 4 of them. Mike was one of the 2 we did not make an offer to. And I was on the recruiting committee, so I was in on the discussion of why or why not. And the feeling of most of the committee members is Mike Pence wasn't sharp enough to be an associate in our firm. The sense was that he's a really nice guy. We all liked him, um, but he just didn't seem like he was going to be that. He wasn't that bright. He wouldn't be a good enough attorney. And so then he's a heartbeat away from, the leader of the free world. But I think Mike has a center of principles. In my own view, is his center is somewhat skewed with his evangelical Christianity, but I think it's authentic. And so when he was asked to do something that was illegal, unconstitutional, that would have violated one of his core principles. So yeah, I mean, plus the fact was, as it turned out, Trump's army is threatening to hang him and threatening his family. So uh, I don't know to what extent he sensed that that sort of thing would develop. Um, and I think he had real reason to be afraid of, getting on Trump's bad side. Not necessarily that he would have anticipated actual physical violence or that people wanted to kill him, but certainly that it could damage his own political ambitions. Um, and I think it has. I mean, histories can go in surprising directions, but you think generally if you're a vice president, you've got a shot as a future president, and I don't see any way that Mike Pence would get the Republican nomination. And I think if he had stayed loyal to Trump and then waited until Trump is not running, he would have a real shot at a Republican nomination. But I I think there's no way now.
That was my next question. If you thought he had any, what his political future is, Jeff, it's hard to get in somebody's mind. It's hard to be a mind reader, but I'm still going to ask the question to you because you spent some time with Mike Pence. Do you think there's any side of Mike Pence where he wonders in the aftermath of everything, all the craziness that happened after the 2020 election, and as you pointed out, how there are threats on him and his family? Do you think there's a side of him if he wonders whether serving as Donald Trump's vice president for a term was worth it?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I would imagine that all things considered, he's glad that he did. I mean, what an experience. I mean, if you just think about it in terms of life experience, what I mean, what an honor to be at that level to serve your country. Um, but also just how interesting. My older brother was a top aide to Dan Quayle when he was vice president. And my brother went all over the world as an advance man for Quayle, and meeting world leaders, meeting uh, you know top people in every category of life, as well as having influence on really important decisions. So I doubt if he regrets it. I think I'm sure that he regrets how it ended, not only losing the election, but also the rampage, insurrection, and him, his life being threatened.
All the vitriol.
Yeah.
We'll move on from this subject in a moment, but we mentioned Dan Quayle, and by all accounts we've read that Dan Quayle apparently played a role in persuading Mike Pence not to go along with Trump's January 6th plan. So there's an interesting aspect to the Quayle connection there. So.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have any insider insight on that. All I know is what I've read in the media,
Right.
but that is interesting. And I also props to Dan Quayle, because from what I've read, Mike Pence was looking for a way to support Trump, but he needed to feel like I have a true legal basis, a constitutional basis that I can do what Trump is asking me to, and he couldn't find one. And
Right.
all of the reasonable voices and the voices he trusted told him, no, you can't do that.
So Dan Quayle could go down in history as helping to prevent having more trouble happen on January 6th. Anyhow, I think I'll probably ask you two more questions, Jeff. Favorite sports movie is one of them.
Oh, um, I have two, Hoosiers and Breaking Away.
You got to mention Hoosiers as an Indiana, of course.
Absolutely.
I saw it. I think I saw that one coming. Well, Jeff, you've been involved in tracks the Himalayas. You just, as I mentioned throughout this interview, you've had your foot in so many things. What is in the future for Jeff Rasley? Why don't you just share with us what you have cooking?
Well, I'm the president of two different foundations, and they're both really interesting. One, the Scientech Foundation of Indiana, focuses on giving grants to educational programs, primarily in the STEM area. Um, and so we find schools and extracurricular activities like robotics, where the program or the school needs funding to put on whatever this educational program that they do, and so we give grants to fund those, and we give out $150,000 to $200,000 a year,
Right.
mostly in Central Indiana. And then the other one is the Bassa Village Foundation, and so it's on the other side of the world, and it's uh, funding basic infrastructure projects, school building, medical clinic, hydroelectric system, water system, basic infrastructure in this very remote area of Nepal called Basa. So, two very different um, foundations or philanthropic enterprises, but I find both of them really interesting, and so I'm spending a lot of time doing that. I don't have a current writing project. 72 Wisdoms may be my last one. Who knows? But I am playing pickleball at least 3 times a week, so that is maybe my final athletic outlet. I don't know, maybe shuffleboard comes
And
after
you have
that.
a book that has a pickleball theme to it too.
That's true. My second to last book is a romantic murder mystery thriller based on a pickleball group.
You mean I think as you probably know, pickleball was invented in Washington State as well. So
I do.
there's a
I do.
story there. Cambridge Island, where I know
I recite the history of pickleball in the book,
have
and
to read it.
there's actually two competing origin stories about the origin of pickleball.
Have to read that book as well. I before we conclude, I do have a retro question for you. I'm a curious guy. Is there any side of you that wishes you extended a job offer to Mike Pence at your old law firm?
Uh, yes, in this sense, Pence sealed the evangelical vote for Trump. If Trump didn't have him as vice president, now who knows who would have been his vice president? If he didn't have Pence as vice president, he might not have gotten the evangelical vote. And if he didn't have the evangelical vote, he might not have won. If Trump had not won the 2016 election, I think our country would be much better off than what it is. So for that reason, yes, I wish we would have given him the job and he wouldn't have become vice president.
If he worked at your firm, he could have maybe got a different career track. Is that kind of where you're going?
Yes,
Okay.
exactly.
Okay. Fascinating. Fascinating. Well, Jeff, I really enjoyed you doing this, coming back in the 126th edition of the Sports Untold podcast. I always have a lot of fun chatting with you. That's you and I definitely stay in touch and hope to meet you in person one day as well. So
That would be great. Come visit the city that you've read about and heard about. We'd love to have you visit, Paul.
likewise, you're ever the Northwest as well. But be happy to take you and your wife out sometime as well. So enjoy this very much.
Thanks,
Thanks.
Paul.
I think we're going to conclude now, Olivia. Thank you.